wanted to introduce our panel today. I was going to start with Mary Abrams, is a creator and director of Moving Body Resources, a space where many gifted teachers and professionals offer classes and workshops and private sessions in personal development and the healing arts. And Mary's background includes 30 years in the movement field as a dancer, choreographer, and for the last 15 years, she's a teacher, a coach, a practitioner of a somatic movement practice called Continuum. Dr. Jeff Morrison, right here on my right, is an award-winning medical doctor who champions a nutritional approach to healthcare, focusing on preventing and reversing degenerative and chronic disease. In 2002, he opened the Morrison Center right a couple blocks away, where he's used his successful integrative medicine and nutritional approach for treating patients with acute and chronic medical problems. Jeff just shared with me, he also apprenticed with Dr. Atkins for a number of years, right? Before he did this. Gwen Lomenheim, at the very end, is a talented educator and trained social therapist who's been a member of the Eastside Institute staff for 20 years. I invited Gwen to be on the panel to represent social therapy, which for the past 35 years has successfully worked to bring a holistic approach to mental health and our mental life. And in the middle, Dr. Jesse Fields is a general internist who's on the staff, and he's a clinician teacher at St. Luke's Roosevelt. And Jesse, I would describe as myself, practices what we would call Western medicine. She's been a student of Dr. Fred Newman for many years and brings a rigorous philosophical approach to her work in medicine. And Jessie also brings political activism to her work as a physician. She ran for Congress on the Independence Party line a number of years ago. She organizes for the Independence Party in the African American community, and has been working with Dr. Lenore Falani in building the Harlem Independence Party Club. So I'd also like to introduce a member of our panel who's not here today, but very much in presence, who's Dr. Fred Newman, who's the founder of the Eastside Institute. Fred received his PhD in philosophy of science and language at Stanford University in 1963. He then abandoned academic philosophy and academia in the 60s for political activism and community organizing. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for some people in the room, some people on the panel, to rediscover philosophy with Dr. Newman over the last 20 years, I guess, where he's come to see philosophy as a critical element in helping people to live more joyous, more developmental, and more philosophical and historical lives. And for many years, it's been my good fortune to be Fred's personal physician. From the early days of our medical relationship, he's challenged me to be a scientist philosopher and not simply accept the medical tenets as taught to us in medical school. And this is not as an abstraction, but simply as a very important part of our healing process. And for example, if I were ordering you a test, he would say, what's the meaning of that test? What are you going to find out? Where does measurement fit in all of our activity? Or diagnosis, what does it mean to label something or to give somebody a labeling, a naming activity? And what was it I thought underlying many of our conversation is this still accepted in most medical circles and most medical practice, is the understanding of the mind-body divide. That there's a tendency in our language, in our practice, in our science, to relate to the mind-body, the inside-outside, the subjective, objective, as something separable and distinct. Now, some people would say, well, they talk to each other, they have a relationship, but fundamentally, we look at them as separate, as something live in different places. So every Saturday afternoon for the past 3 years, Fred holds a class, a conversation, which I'm part of, that is attended by many people who've worked over the years as community organizers, building independent grassroots organizations They're concerned with human development, whether that's in politics, whether that's in performance, whether it's in theater, whether it's youth development. And our philosophical meanderings have been very vast. We've talked about what's reality, where language fits in, what's postmodernism, Plato, Hegel, Kant, Davidson, Wittgenstein, among others. And several months ago, we were exploring postmodernism, and we began talking about this issue of mind-body dualism and asking, where was philosophy on this point? Did philosophy still hold to what we call a Cartesian model of the mind-body divide, which is expressed as the ghost in the machine? Is this still the way philosophy was thinking about it? And it was this class that motivated the discussion today, and where I was introduced to a British philosopher who wrote and published something called The Concept of Mind in 1949, where he philosophically deconstructs the Cartesian understanding of mind-body dualism and has led, I guess, the assault on dualism in philosophy, which, according to Fred, who's the most knowledgeable, has just about been abandoned. And subsequent work in cybernetics and computer-simulated thinking models and robots have all continued to challenge the notion of dualism in favor of a more holistic understanding of mind-body. And I'm not going to present the whole Ryle's argument because you already looked at it, and that would take a long time. But I thought that I just wanted to introduce the workshop with my understanding of Ryle's, who says that performance, activities, what the body does are not clues or interpretations of the workings of the mind. They are the mind. And that is what the mind is. And I think in the class, Fred has often said that the mind-body understanding or concept could best be understood as human activity. That's what we have. In life, we don't go around saying to ourselves, now I'm using my mind and now my body. So when we're talking about a holistic practice of health and healing, I think what we're talking about is a practice that doesn't see the separation, the dichotomy between mind and body. And to me, that's what a holistic practice is. And I thought it would be interesting to have this very panel of people come to share this conversation and explore something about what does it mean to do a holistic practice, which I know is not integrative, but it's close. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the premises of my wanting of this workshop, and I think that many of us share, that American healthcare has, in spite of spending millions and millions of dollars, has really failed to impact on the good health of our society. And that if we are going to do that, we really have to reorganize or create a different social arrangement of health, or do something different in our practice of health. And I certainly think if we're going to impact on the health of our people as a nation, that we have to move towards a more integrative, holistic approach to healthcare. So I want to welcome you all to help us with this dialogue and conversation. And I thought what I'd like to do is to ask each of the members of the panel to give a brief introduction of yourself by way of responding to the question, what your understanding or conception of holism is as is expressed in your practice of health and healing. So I'll let you answer that.
Okay, start with me. And I'm a newcomer to philosophical discussion, so it makes sense to start with me. I have no idea where to take this. Well, I guess I would consider myself as an integrative medical practitioner. And when I am evaluating a patient, coming from a conventional medical background, I went to medical school in Philadelphia, so of course I'm thinking about the Phillies tonight. And now I'm practicing. If there's any Yankees fans out there, we can have a philosophical debate about who should win this World Series. What's the meaning of a home run? And so I did a conventional family practice residency, and then after that I felt that that was the beginning of my education in healthcare, because to me, healthcare was taking care of the whole person. It was understanding what the underlying cause of the person's health issue was. If a person is diagnosed with high blood pressure, what does that mean? Why is that happening to that person? We had a very good education in medical school on pharmacology and pharmacokinetics, which means the study of how medications work on a cellular level, what taking a medication will do to a person's blood, what it does to a person's blood pressure or blood sugar. And it's a very targeted approach. Basically, that's what medicine is seeking to do, is treat symptoms. That's what people go to a doctor for, is they have a headache, so they take a headache medicine. Or they find out that they've got high blood pressure, and they take a blood pressure medicine to get their blood pressure down, which might be causing the headaches. But if we take a look at just blood pressure, for example, and we say, why does a person have an elevated blood pressure? And we look at the whole person. In my practice, I'm always looking at what is the physical component to that problem and what is the emotional component to that problem. And that's, I think, where I would come into having a consideration of holism. It's looking at both the physical and emotional component. So for the example of high blood pressure, which is a very common medical condition, and many people get heart disease from this condition, and it's considered like the silent killer, there's a lot of reasons that a person could have high blood pressure, and everyone's different. It could be a person's diet. That's like the typical reason that I see. And the issue is typically maybe a person has too much salt in their diet. Or maybe a person has food allergies that have not been diagnosed that's causing inflammation in their blood vessels. And if the food is removed, then that will lower the blood pressure. Maybe it's because they're not getting enough sleep at night. Maybe it's because they're overweight and it's causing sleep apnea, which is causing high blood pressure. So weight loss might help. Maybe it's because they have been eating foods that are deficient in magnesium, and we do a blood test and we find this mineral, which is pretty ubiquitous in a vegetarian diet, but not very common in a standard American diet. If that's deficient, that might be the cause. We look at that whole physical component, and then we also look at the emotional component. So what is happening to that person's life? How is their relationship with their significant other? How is their relationship with their parents? How about their relationship with their children? Or their work situation? Or maybe they have post-traumatic stress from some event that happened 20 years ago that's still playing out over and over again. So holism to me is looking at the whole person. And rather than treating a symptom, I think it's treating the underlying cause. Does that sound okay, Susan?
That sounds good. That sounds good for a start.
So thank you. That was very, very good and helpful. And my approach in terms of my practice is, we deal with the things that Jeff mentioned, but I practice in the Harlem community, and part of what I do stems from my personal history and becoming a doctor. As for me, it was a way to make a contribution, to make a difference, particularly to the African American community and to the poor community, such as the one that I grew up in. And so I always considered being a doctor as a way of making social change and helping people in communities to grow, to develop, to go beyond the limitations, social limitations, to go beyond poverty, underdevelopment. And so I started practicing on the west side of Chicago after I went to medical school in Philadelphia also. And then I had a scholarship which paid for my education and required me to go outside of Philadelphia to pay back for the scholarship that I had received for medical school after I finished my residency. I ended up practicing on the west side of Chicago in a poor community, and I was very eager to go out and talk about health issues, talk about smoking and diet and better health practices that people could pursue. I went to a church and spoke, and I actually met up with the independent political movement and Dr. Polanyi's work, and back then what was the New Alliance Party. And I got involved. I saw the limitations of just practicing in the office, in the clinic, because I wanted to address the kinds of problems that people brought into me. And I see a lot of hypertension, high blood pressure. I had patients coming in to the office who couldn't afford to take the bus to come to keep their appointments, couldn't afford to get their medications, and were under a lot of stress for a lot of reasons, mostly to do with being poor. So I wanted to address those problems in a broader way. I have always seen health as connected to everything. My conception of holism is that health and wellness have to do with many issues, environmental, certainly biologic, scientific, as well as economic, political, historical, environmental, having to do with really what's happening in the world, in the community, on an individual and a broader level, the family and the community. And so I became a political activist as well as a doctor. And for me, the first time I ran for office in New York City, I ran as a doctor, and it meant so much to me to take the concerns and frustrations that I had seen in the office, practicing medicine in the hospital and in the clinic, out into the community and talk about healthcare issues, from HIV, hypertension, hepatitis C, asthma. I practice in Harlem, and there are major medical problems, high infant mortality, asthma epidemic, etc. And so I wanted to be able to address those things at a broader level. I'm still doing that. It's really, for me, holism, practicing holistically, is not only listening to the patient and including patients in the relationship and decision making. It's, for me, part of it is also about building the doctor-patient relationship. That's everything. I think it means a lot to my patients. I went into internal medicine primary care because you get to have a long-term relationship with patients. You don't just see them for an acute problem, like in the emergency room or for a surgical procedure, but you can have a long-term relationship. And I think that makes a difference to people to have that therapeutic relationship. I think in and of itself, it can be helpful and healing and therapeutic to have. You know, I was just, a couple of examples. I had a patient who, she was having different kinds of symptoms, abdominal pain, and she's talked to me about these things before, but similar symptoms to what she's had before. And you know, she's had tests, and we've examined her, and we haven't found anything physically wrong. And I said to her, you know, everything is connected. Emotionality and your well-being, or how you feel, is connected. And she said, yes, absolutely. And we had this conversation about the fact that her symptoms were really not just connected, but that it was one with the stress in her life, things she's unhappy about. She's a religious woman, and she thinks, you know, she feels that going to church and listening to her pastor should be enough, but she's really unhappy about a lot of things. So we spoke about possibly her going into therapy, and I think our conversation, just the fact that I listened to her, to what she had to say, and we had a conversation about it, and we know, you know, I've known her over a period of time. She said, "Thank you for listening," and that I consider part of holism, is just listening for the patient and having them participate in the next steps and what's going to happen. So I teach at a medical school in Harlem, and I was there today, and there was a lecture about healthy practices and encouraging patients to lose weight. And one of the medical students asked, well, what do you do when the patient comes back again and again? You've told them they should lose weight, you've told them what to do, and they haven't done it. And sometimes physicians get very frustrated. about that and kind of give up on the patients. And I raised my hand. I wasn't giving a lecture, but I raised my hand and I said, I think it's important to speak with the patient about that, to say, you know, we've spoken about this, I've told you, I made suggestions, but it doesn't seem to be working. What do you think we should do? You know, I feel kind of frustrated. I'd like to know, is there something else we could be doing? How can we address this? Maybe there's something different to include the patient in figuring out how to reorganize this, not to give up on the patient, not to say, well, if you're not going to do this, forget it. I'm telling you what to do. I mean, imagine how difficult it is in this society for people to lose weight. It's a cultural issue. It's hard. Like, you have to change a lot of things. So, anyway, I'm doing some other things that perhaps I'll get a chance to share with you. But that's something about how I see holism.
I just read an article I was reading that obesity hasn't changed a bit.
It hasn't changed a bit, even though doctors give these diagnoses. It's one of those issues. It's a developmental issue, I think. But anyway, we can talk more.
Well, I got into this not because I was even interested in health and healing at all. My interest has always been creativity, and coming from a background of being a dancer and choreographer. But really, what I've always been interested in is moving. What's moving? How do we move? How many ways do we move? And what does moving have to do with the experience of being a human being here on this planet at this time? So, as I've explored that in my life in different ways over time, I was introduced to this work that I've been exploring now for the last 15 years called Continuum Movement, which explores the experience of being human by waking up more awareness at the silent level of our experience of what's going on in what we call the body. And so we exploring with breath and sound and movements that are more fluid in the sense of the way a cell would move or an organismic biological process would unfold. And so through this kind of exploration, discovering more of what's going on at that silent level process. And including in this exploring that I do with myself and the people who come to be with me, is recognizing that we need to make meaning in our process, and part of our meaning-making organism is language and symbols. And so how it is that we actually language our experience to ourselves, emotional language, physical language, what we might call intellectual language, philosophical language, all of those things are part of the total body experience. So a lot of what I'm exploring with people is listening to language, listening to the silent level experience, and asking a lot of questions, including the whole feeling realm process is part of the exploration of what it means to be alive. And so a lot of people come to this kind of work because they find that it feels healing. When they can engage with themselves creatively, in a sense, perform themselves at many levels, from the micro to the macro, from the silent to the verbal, and to many kinds of expressions in between, what is it that they begin to discover? And they begin to discover that they have more movement in that, more wholeness. A lot of what I explore is, in my listening, is also encouraging people to try on new language. A lot of what I hear is we talk about the body, as if I'm existing in some ultimate body that exists somewhere up beyond me, so I refer to it as the arm or the leg or the head. So inviting people that I work with, what do you notice if you actually say my arm, my leg, my body? And a whole different feeling flow process begins, and movement begins to emerge out of that. So that's just kind of one aspect of language that I'm regularly inviting people to try on as a kind of development of wholeness in the way that I've explored. So I think I'll just kind of pause right there and sure there'll be more to say.
This is fascinating. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. I'm Gwen Lowenheim, and I think one of the things that I think we've found in practicing social therapeutics in many different kinds of environments, whether it's in a therapy group or in a business location or in a school with children, I think is to engage in philosophical conversations, and in part to take on what one of the philosophers that's been very impactful for us in social therapy is Ludwig Wittgenstein, and what he talks about is a whole mythology deposited in our language. There's a whole mythology deposited in our language. So if you look at that health-wise, I found what you were just saying about the body really interesting. If you can play with some of the language, and you can have different experiences. But if you look at it health-wise, what I have found is that one of the major ways of speaking about health for people is problem-oriented. It's very organized. It's just organized around problems. And one of the things about the problem paradigm or the problem solution paradigm is that I think it gives people a sense of order to something or patterning to life, which is actually much more complex. And I also have had pretty serious immunological health problems over the years. And it's a real struggle to live life in all its complexity and all its ups and downs and all its positives and negatives and flux and ins and outs and what's going on health-wise or body-wise is part of that. And so that's, for me, holistic has a lot to do with life, living, having this be part of one's life. And our health is so social that I was thinking about when I first got ill. My daughter was very young, and so she came to know me as somebody with a lot of health limitations, and she was very, very supportive of me. So over the years, I had to find ways to really respect that she had that to give to me, and that rather than that this was a problem in our relationship, that her mother had this serious illness. That was very, very challenging. It still is to this day. So another area when I think about holistic health is how we conduct conversations. And I find health conversations very, very, very difficult. It seems like all of a sudden when someone's talking about health or their health, it becomes very much about them. And people don't enjoy the conversations very much. They don't know how to have a creative, playful, giving conversation when talking about health. And I think that hurts people because it keeps you separate from people because they don't really want to hear about your health anymore. So it keeps you separate and distant rather than what can we do together that could be growthful for us together in a way you might when you're doing something else. And I still find that very challenging.
Well, I think this paradigm of mind-body is so very embedded in our society. I mean, philosophically, maybe the philosophers have challenged it, but practically, it's there, and it's in our language, and it's in, I think, our science. It's very hard to break out of that and talk about doing health in another way. I mean, people literally say, is it in my head or is it in my body? And if you say, well, I don't think there's a difference, or there's no, that separation probably isn't very helpful. I think people think you're still trying to go in their head. I mean, that's my experience. It's huge. It's huge how deep that paradigm is. So that was one of the questions I thought, is, you know, at the level of societal change, it seems to me to affect a transformation of this, you have to have, well, I guess you call it a paradigm shift, or which takes years, you know, has a very long time for that to happen, and all of a sudden you might say, wow, it's here. But I think that since these different ways of understanding, we're all in between that, so that I think that's why it's very hard linguistically. But that's how it's expressed, is linguistically. Do people just think we need a different kind of language? Because do we need something different to be able to talk about this, and both with our patients, or the people we're taking care of, but also to each other? Because I think that's one of the things that is enormous impediment. I mean, you could say, you know, that the for-profit system doesn't support exploring alternative approaches, which I agree that's an element, but I don't think that's the only element. I think there's just these kind of conflicting paradigms really has an impact on how people even are talking about these things. So that's what I thought it would be helpful for the panel maybe to address, is how do you talk about that when your clients, the people you're talking to, probably have a very different conception of this than you do.
Well, I just even noticed that we all have a different language that we're using to describe our practices. So when a person goes to a certain type of school to learn their trade, there is a language that goes with that. That's how we define ourselves within that type of educational paradigm. I'm not sure that we will ever have one common language for all of our health systems. We haven't come up with one language to speak with the people that live across the ocean, or down the country below, south of us, or north of us. So from a practical perspective, we find comfort in that language process that we use. And it's very useful. It helps us to describe what we're talking about. Hopefully, there will be one language that's generally agreed upon that people can use together to describe these processes. I'm not sure a new language necessarily needs to be created, but we need to be communicating. And that communication process is just as challenging with our significant other as it is with maybe a different political party, or maybe even with our patients. Our patients come to us, I believe, because they understand our language to some degree. They've heard about our language, they've read about it, at least they have to with me. They have educated themselves. They themselves have some concept of where they believe that they would like their health to go, and they need a coach, or they need someone to help get them to that next level. And since we've done additional study in this one particular paradigm, we can help. That's really where I feel that us as healthcare providers sort of shine, is to be the coach.
Do you have questions, Laura?
Sure.
I was interested in part of the announcement for the seminar tonight was about the issue of, which is pretty broad in society these days, of people using different paradigms. You know, somebody, for example, uses Western medicine, and they may go to a Chinese acupuncture herbalist for the same complaint, or the same group of issues, or whatever. And I think as part of the announcement, Susan, you mentioned, you know, can we just combine these things, or are they, you know, how do we deal with that, especially as there are more and more of them, and more people are using perhaps a few and trying to put them together. So I was interested in your response, and it just brought that to my mind that you're speaking very honestly, I see, about how a doctor would see themselves as, you know, we're defined by this paradigm, this is what we learned, but now we're in a world where there's a lot more of these multiple paradigms kind of butting up against each other. So I don't want to sort of, you know, you're steering the conversation here, but I just threw that out there as
I think it's a great, and really, where I guess my next thought would go along with what you're saying is that it's our responsibilities to understand other languages within other paradigms. Like constantly people come in, every day I'll have a patient coming in. I went to my acupuncturist, they said I've got kidney deficiency. What does that mean to me? What does that mean to me? Well, I can translate that to say usually that means adrenal.
Right.
Like I can understand that what that means in conventional medicine.
But it's not
And then I can work with that patient and with their acupuncturist. And I think it really goes back down to not being, not locking ourselves into our paradigm, using that as a platform for healing, and then recognizing that we don't necessarily know everything in one health system. There's so much here, and understanding and knowing about the other perspectives allows for the whole person to be healed. So that's really where I think
It may be that we're in the process, as Susan was suggesting, maybe there's a transition going on. I think it has to come from the activity changing. There are different kinds of approaches, alternative medicines, and all these things happening on the ground that people are pursuing. And I think there's also an effort to, part of the problem with the language that we use is the disease, the diagnoses. And you have a diagnosis, and I think what Jeff was saying, everybody's different. People. One of the things that has been said, I'm quoting someone, I think the doctor that you interviewed, that there's no disease. They're people who have with symptoms, with medical concerns and issues. But there aren't diseases separate from human beings. That's one of the divisions that I think holds back healing and health. So there are many manifestations of what we call diabetes. It's very different in different people. And so I think there's a kind of a movement or an effort going on to be patient-centered, to deal with the person in a holistic way, and for the person to be able to pursue different kinds of alternative measures to address that. I think that is happening, and we want to support it and contribute to it. And I don't think the change is going to come from some decision, well, this is the language, but I think it will come from that activity that's happening in this country and around the world.
I think it is important that we develop more language. That we have the language that exists, and we need more language along with that, so that we're not limiting ourselves to what healing can be. I really try to encourage myself and the people that I'm in communication with to really language their experience as an activity instead of my health. I'm living, I'm healing, I'm whatever it might be, but that I'm more engaged in an activity than a sort of noun of existence. And the word alternative always makes me sort of go like this.
There's some better language.
I don't understand why anything has to be alternative to something else. They're all options. And maybe over time, as a culture or society, we've leaned towards certain options more often than others. But they don't have to be alternative to anything. It's all part of what we can explore. And I even think supporting that at the idea level is important for people, so that they'll in a sense think of other options as well as going to the doctor.
I cringe at alternative too, and then I try to think, well, how do you talk about this? Traditional, non-traditional, Western, non-Western, It does have a sense of that it's somewhere out there. Naomi? You should ask questions.
I like what you were just saying, and I was thinking that there's maybe part of shifting paradigms is adding on to the language. And I'm a physical therapist, and I think that one big overriding constraint in terms of the paradigm of science and of medicine is the notion of causality. And I'm struck when you, Jeffrey, were talking about trying to find the underlying cause of what someone is coming to you for. And yet, when you were speaking of how you do that and how you go about it, it was clear that it wasn't just looking for a cause, it was kind of engaging the person in what's going on in their life and looking at a lot of different elements that might contribute to this. And I know that in my own practice, when someone comes to me with back pain, the first question on their mind is what's causing it. And often we don't know. And what I sometimes say to people, well, if you go to a neurologist, they'll tell you that it's the nerve being pinched. If you go to an orthopedist, they'll say it's degenerative arthritis. And there's a lot of different factors. And I find that trying to break up this notion of cause allows people to take much more of an active role in discovering with me what's going on and learning more what they can do about it. And sometimes that opens up more possibilities for them just growing and being stronger and being more healthy. But I think that notion of cause, I find it, on the one hand, sometimes it's very useful. And on the other hand, it's also extremely restrictive and constraining, and it tends to define how we think about something going on in our body.
Helpful during the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking of causes as broad as any of our other linguistic, kind of boxes, because I think cause is often where is it particularly located in my spleen, or in my leg, where's the particular thing.
Well,
Okay.
what I would say to that also, and this is, I think, a problem of our current healthcare system, is that expectations are a little bit unrealistic. And the expectations that many people have are based on what they are being told by many loud voices, which could be their insurance company or the government or like very vocal people. And what happens is people feel that they should be well, and that if you are sick, there's a cause and you figure it out and you're done with it very quickly. There was an initiative that Richard Nixon said that we're going to stamp out cancer before the end of this year, or we're going to figure that out, and we still haven't figured it out. But that's what he said on public television. People are still believing that that's going to happen. Like as if it's the cancer's problem or that person's problem that they got cancer. And it's really, in my opinion, the goal is to sort of shift back into sort of an old-fashioned type of paradigm, which is that we are sort of responsible for taking care of ourselves. At one point it was, if we had a cold, we would go to our grandmother or our mother and they'd make us chicken stew. And then we'd go we'd rest for a while and we'd get better. When I was going through residency, we would get calls at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning regularly to say, oh, I have a stuffy nose, what should I do? Well, did you watch that commercial? You can take NyQuil. There's another group of people telling them what to do. But so this goes back to the education. And I think the hope for a paradigm shift would be really to shift back to old-fashioned type of medicine, where we all learn to take care of ourselves better.
I think the accountability, the self-accountability, the personal responsibility is the key, because then if you have that, then you can decide what kind of an expert or skill might I need, and you may have to trace around and try different things, talk to other people, but you eventually converge on it. But if you just say to somebody, here I am, figure me out, that's not adequate. And I had an experience, and it taught me a lot about what's involved. And what it taught me, before I mention the thing, is that a cause, that's a complex of things, because you can have a cause of a cause, you can have a chain of things. So in the environment, if there's something that is causing an inflammation. Either arthritis or this, but something in the environment can be setting this off. And you can have. I had a physical therapist. She was a wonderful acupuncturist, very skilled. She knew French, Korean, Chinese, and she was trained as an MD in Russia with physical therapy specialty. That's the only way you can be a physical therapist in Russia, according to what she told me. So she's skilled, and then tons of experience and sensitive. But she was treating something in my foot. There was an inflammation, the heel was getting more and more painful. I was going to go to Amsterdam in a couple months, things. So I went along with her, and it would get better and worse and better and worse. What was happening is there were things going on in my shoe that in turn were aggravated by just the structure of my foot. It was pronation. Okay. And this was something that it wasn't in her area of expertise, and it wasn't supposed to be. But she thought she could keep doing what, keep making it better when it was worse. But she wasn't concerned or think about what could be making it worse. Then I went to a podiatrist. He understood, but he didn't know exactly the kind of solution. He gave me an approximate one, which was theoretically good, but didn't quite fit. He's saying, well, have something fit into your, just get some supports and things for really good ones, expensive ones, for to put in your shoe, just the things that would keep the foot from moving. So I go down and I got a really good guy in a store that sold to good runners, and he said, do you have to stick with that? What about if you just got a shoe that was built in the first place like that? That's much better. And I tried that, and then the problems went away. I mean, it took a while for the inflammation to go down. It took a month or two. By the time I got that Amsterdam, I was halfway there. And okay, so I think that the environment is a key thing, and not every practitioner will understand all of the things in that environment and the relevant things. So, and ultimately, it was my responsibility. But the therapist felt that she could just keep going with that rather than say to me, this is persistent. I'm not sure why, but you'll have to decide, what we do next. You want to keep coming?
I'm going to stop you, but I absolutely agree that I think that
No.
part of this is actually, which many people have referenced, is hearing the patient's voice in this, which I consider to be very
Essential.
essential to a holistic practice. If you're not including that voice in a very complete way, in totalistic way, you're not really doing that, because I think that has everything to do with whether you're working with the same paradigm, or if you're working with the same belief system, or how you're both understanding what you're talking about. It seems to me that that's a very important point. Did you have a question? Other questions, David? Yeah.
Do you find what has been your experience? I'm speaking mainly to the MDs. What has been your experience? It sounds like you are people who would be able to say to your patients, I don't know, and that to be able to give that kind of answer to your patients. And do you find resistance to that sort of answer? Do you find resistance to leaving some ambiguity in your diagnosis and the way that you're dealing with your patients, or do you feel that gives them empowers them in some way? Does that make sense?
Are you suggesting we don't know?
Not you.
I think, did you want to?
I mean, I feel, every day I am always curious by presentations. Even, what we end up doing is finding patterns that we recognize as sort of avenues to enter into helping a person get on track. And every day there's a new scenario that makes us or challenges us. There are certainly times when we don't know, and in my personal practice, I've said, I have to look this up, I have to do more research, or please, let me get back to you next week. Or maybe I have a colleague that I think would be better suited to come to a conclusion.
And do you find that people find that their expectations haven't been met, or do they accept that from you?
I think as long as well, I would answer it two ways. Number one, of course, patients are very happy to believe that I know somebody that can help them find the solution, or that I can help find it if I put in some extra time. And then as long as I give them a prescription for Viagra, they'll probably just do this one.
I don't know
And I'm
most
kidding.
of the time. I don't know most of the time, and I say to the, I mean, it depends on the context. If they ask you something like, what's this medication, you know, I could say what Jeff said, I'll find out, I'll figure it. But the thing that I don't know is what's going to happen next. What are we going to do together? How are we going to figure this out? What's going on? Like Nomi, the example that Nomi gave of back pain, which is one of the most common things, we don't know. We don't know what is causing it. But we can do things together that may help. We can address it. We can try physical therapy and exercise, and you know, we want you to keep doing that. And I won't leave you. We're gonna work on this together.
And Jesse,
I
have
think
you
that's-
also had patients who may have brought you information that's where, like, sometimes patients
Yeah.
do their own research and say, this is what I've been experiencing. Can you help me work through this? Like, and then I read it.
Right, and you're not familiar with what they're bringing you, and is that you
Yes,
say, I
absolutely.
don't know. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this. I don't think patients have a hard time with that. I think the thing that patients want is to be able to trust their doctor, to be able. That means everything, and it's not really a knowing, but it's a trust that you will advise them as best you can, that you won't, you know, give up on them or put them in a dangerous situation, that you'll work with them, that you'll stay with them. You know, they can do things and bring it to you, and you can talk about it. I think that's what. I don't think they're that much into knowing. I mean, they want you to be competent, of course, but.
So I wanted to hear from Mary and Gwen in terms of this knowing business, because I think that as quite a non-medical people, I think you have a different experience perhaps of wanting to know, or is it the same, or, you know, because I think it's very pervasive myself.
Yeah.
I'll let you tell.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you were asking. And there's different kinds of not knowings, I find, both as a patient and also as a patient and also as a therapist, as a teacher, you know, in your different roles with people. And when you were first speaking, Jesse, about your interaction with your patient, when you were at the Grand Rounds, or
The medical school.
when you were suggesting that people could say to the person who's not doing the things to lose weight that they're supposed to do, or whatever, that the doctor could say, what should we do now? I think that's, and that you were just talking about now, saying to people, I think that's a kind of knowing, not knowing, that's very intimate, and I find that extremely uncomfortable with medical professionals. And I know the work that you've done, Susan, that I've done with you some around teaching doctors how to improvise with what patients do say to them. Was, I thought, so useful, because a lot of times I think people go to, I have to have something, I have to know what to say here, because it's uncomfortable. It's intimate, and times I've tried to have those kind of conversations with a medical doctor, I feel very embarrassed, to kind of go into that direction, that we don't know what we're going to do together. We don't know what to do together. So I think that there's the not knowing.
How much time do you think is required during that doctor-patient interaction in order to get to the point to explore that not knowing part?
Well, I think maybe you could answer, because.
Well, I think it's part of building what I was saying about building a relationship. It may not happen in one visit. Like, the first visit, you go through the history and you do a complete history and physical. It's a new patient. You're trying to, collect the information. And there is real information and things that are important. There's what we call data that you want to know about the patient's risk factors and all of those things. But I don't think that necessarily is on the, sometimes it is, and I think that the issues with time is really such a disservice, such a tragedy, is one of the failures of medicine, that doctors can't spend enough time with patients. It's like 10-minute, 15-minute visits. It's never enough. But I kind of address that somewhat in terms of having a long-term relationship, seeing the patients again and again over time and getting to know them, and they're getting to know you. I also am in the community, so I see my patients. I go knock on doors and do voter registration and talk about the campaigns, political campaigns. And I see my patients out there, and they know that I'm out there. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
But I appreciate what you're saying about the discomfort, and I think there's discomfort on both sides,
Yeah.
and some patients will feel very uncomfortable with the doctor saying they don't know. I don't mean it in that way of it's kind of conveying an incompetence. I mean an intimacy, just like you were saying.
I think I have the advantage in the sense that I actually tell the people who come to me, I don't really know. Because what I'm interested in exploring with the people who come to me is to actually discover not knowing. Because we know what hurts. We don't always know what really feels good. And so what we're trying to discover is all the resources that actually build support so that what hurts doesn't take center stage for our attention all the time, and that maybe there's more options for them dealing with what isn't comfortable, because we have more of what is comfortable. So I'm, in a sense, in the job of not knowing, and it always amazes me when I am exploring something with somebody, and they say, oh, the left shoulder is and we do something in their right knee and their shoulder feels better.
That's somatic experience, isn't it?
But it's an.
Am I beginning to understand?
I'm not doing the somatic experience with a capital S and a capital E, because there is a practice called somatic experiencing, but I do somatic work, yeah. So, just, I can't remember how I got sidetracked, but
I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. So it's always amazing when something like that does happen, and I only know certain things to a degree because I've had the time to hang out for so long with my body, with many bodies, and I get a sense of how things are connecting in different ways.
And that's like a perfect reason why dualism just can't possibly exist. Like that's how you almost are getting a perfect example of holism. Like, how can your left shoulder pain go away if you're focusing on your right foot?
Well, yeah, I've experimented with that. I think Mary's a wonderful healer, and I've experimented with different ways of either doing, healthcare groups or, health teams, and because to expand the range in that way of, discovering things, creativity, a more creative way to do your health. And I think since people brought up the old time issue, it would be good to ask the question, and people can, from the audience, I'd love to know your thought. Given that we, in some ways, do propose a more integrative, holistic approach to health and healing, what do you think it would take to actually make that happen in the United States of America? Given both our, ways of thinking about these things and the embeddedness of a medical dualism in our, just practically in the society, but also just in terms of how to think about it and what to say to Obama after we think. So on all of that range, and so what's the possibility for a new practice of holistic healing in our society?
I have something that addresses that and also kind of goes back to something we were talking about relative to language. I think helping people get more oriented in the caring is important. When we talk about health, really what the activity is caring. And so how is it that we're caring in the process of what we're calling healing or developing health? And even talking to to the people that I'm with to engage in this activity of caring. Like, how is it that you're caring about in what you're experiencing? How have you been cared for? What does that mean to you? All of that. And so I think that would be one thing to present to Obama.
Well, certainly the language of the debate is pretty mundane.
And then actually one other small piece in the caring is that I often feel like I have to teach people how to be unhealthy. Like we're so quick to try to be healthy or whatever that image is. We don't even know what we're experiencing that's not healthy for us. And in a sense, how am I caring in that state of not being well? So that I can learn what I might need to become something else.
In the language of medicine, or in people that experience the dis-ease, I think, dis-ease of our bodies, and I think that's very hard to do. I agree with you. I think people really want to see past that.
I think that Jeff was talking about that earlier in terms of the sort of this notion people have that they're supposed to be healthy, but there's something called health, and everything else is wrong. Something's wrong, and it must be fixed now. And then you go to different doctors to get it fixed. But I think what you're proposing is very rich.
Well, this is definitely for me stimulated a number of different thoughts and experiences and so forth. So I want to participate. I'm not sure where to jump in. I guess maybe inspired by what Mary was saying about caring. And this thing about the paradigm that it must have perfect health, which once you pass the age of whatever, like forget about it. But my life in the last couple of years, I've been caring for my parents. And a lot of that has involved seeing a lot of doctors, mainly specialists. And specialists are a kind of doctor. People I know have experienced this. Because they're really tunnel vision, almost all of them. But that's the way things are organized. And an overriding tension, and this is, I'm not saying anything new anymore, I guess, is I immediately, in taking on the task of caring for my parents, I was about their quality of life. They were very old, in their 80s. One is now dead, one is still living. And they're never going to be anything close to well. My mother has a lot of physical pain. My father had a lot of different, diverse, and sometimes completely strange medical problems that no one he ever visited was able to tell him very much about. And I was the guy who got them to the doctors and then sat in the doctor's room with them, and often was the person the doctor was talking to. And I realized that a lot of it, I'm thinking back now to Susan, you were saying, the voice of the patient. Well, that's a very complex phrase in and of itself. Because I'm going to all these different specialists, and I'm dealing with all kinds of information. It's impacting on me. I'm representing some people, and then also occasionally saying things as well. And in some ways, I realized that I was the communication link between various specialists, or it might be an acupuncturist with a Western doctor. They never, and sometimes they do talk to each other, it's not often, but in this story I'm telling, they never did. But I would come in, not so much with an article, I didn't think of that one, but I would come in and say, well, we kind of did a little of this, what do you think? And it was really all about what that conversation would be, what that 15 minutes was. And a bunch of different 15 minutes is. And I began to, once I got over how daunting the task was, and it is, I realized this was a creative exercise, at least for me. But I could organize the people I was working with to play with that to the extent that they felt like they could. And actually, often I got very good responses. Because I think actually doctors like, you guys could tell me, like interesting situations to walk into the office. Not the usual, oh my God, this hurts, fix it. You know. And because I think what we're talking about here is a cultural shift. That, and as everyone has said, it is already going on, is going to come from the bottom up, right? And I'm touched by more and more people who are trained being open to like, hey, let's do this better culturally, not just, oh, let's do a single payer or whatever these mechanical solutions are. And cultural shifts take time, on one hand, but on another hand, there are ongoing processes, you know? So in some sense, it might take hundreds of years to actually turn this sucker around, but it's already being turned around because it's a moving thing, it's a process. And there are tremendous demands on the patient in this shift.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think to the extent patients are engaging in the dialogue of what does this mean, how are you thinking about it, the philosophical dialogue, and that's why, and kind of think it's wonderful to have this rediscovery of philosophy as a way for ordinary people to get help with this stuff. Is to the extent I think that's where the professionals, as it were, will move, because I think we're not so good at that.
The other thing that I would make a point at this moment is a lot of our education comes from a few sources. One is television. Does anybody watch TV here? Radio. Does anybody listen to talk radio? And then a little bit, I think, from speaking in these types of venues, which I'm really impressed with because this is where we can really generate some great new ideas. But the big places like TV and radio, what we're listening to are sources that have a specific agenda. And that agenda is typically about selling cookies, bread, pasta, fast foods, prescription medications, fitting into thinner clothes, driving faster cars. It's messages that are getting out there into our brains all the time that are creating, number one, unrealistic expectations, and then potential patterns of economic forces where we go out and shop, pick up the wrong foods that are easy to make, not healthy for us. And that's where I'm concerned about the paradigm shift is heading in the wrong direction, where of course we're going to have more healthcare problems because we're not eating as healthy as we used to be. And just on that very one fundamental level alone, if there was one shift, and frankly, I hate to say it, but Atkins was a person that literally had 2 years of completely transforming the bread industry, where people stopped eating bread for a year or two. We're eating, unfortunately, too much fat, but hopefully more vegetables.
A lot of bacon.
So that's where our shift might need to transform, and it really is economic forces, and it's subtle, it's pervasive, and we are hopefully the I guess maybe the bellwethers or the lighthouse that hopefully guides into a direction that is more helpful, but it's foggy out there. It's not easy to see it.
Well, it is going. I hear you. It is going in many directions. Certainly, there's a polarization. Of course, for one comment, I mean, the cultural shift hopefully will also end capitalism, along with all this other stuff. And then we might rock and roll. might actually be able to rock and roll with this,
Well,
but I
that's
hear
like-
you totally.
I just wanted to say something in terms of the Obama, what we would say to Obama. I think this is what you said, David, and the many experiences that go with that and that, you know, happen is what is left out of the health debate. It's, as you referenced, it's talked about in this way. It's all about money and decreasing costs and whether it's a single payer or it's a very sterile debate, and it's in Congress. It needs to, the voices of the patients, as Susan said, and of other options and other communities and independents and poor people and patients who have the experience of going to the doctor, that needs to be in the debate. That needs to be amplified. You don't hear that. You don't hear that at all.
Jesse,
It's
let me,
completely
I want to also make a comment on that, which is I don't think we're even debating the right thing. We should be debating why are prescription medications so expensive? Why is insurance so expensive? It's really, most of that money is going to the healthcare executives or to paying people to defend why they should not pay doctors or for certain procedures. And the third thing is, I mean, of course, malpractice insurance is ridiculous. I mean, we're getting...
Well, yes, and I'll take issue with this. We have to wrap up too in a second. But I'll take issue with it because I think the yes and is, I mean, if this is the, you know, if you look at what the American people are doing, they're spending more of their healthcare dollars on other forms of treatment. I'm not saying alternate. I'm not using that word. But it's true as other than Western medicine. And
Which is a good thing because now people...
Well, no, this is what I'm saying is I think that you have this gap between where the American people are, and this is the democracy issue, I think, where the American people are and in terms of what they're doing and wanting, and not everybody wants other than Western medicine, but I think they want something different. They're saying that with their dollars, they're saying where they're putting their dollars, and yet that's not even in the mix. That's not even in the debate. Now, isn't that interesting? It seems to me that that's, so that's what I think is the shift seems to me needs to, in some ways, figure out how people, you know, are going to, ordinary people are going to have their input into what they want to see as a healthcare practice. In the, you know, what kind of social arrangements do they want in the medical care system? And, you know, I mean, Bush, who was, you know, this, you know, was probably going to go down in history as the worst president ever, had something called a healthcare account. But there is something about that. I wouldn't say that's the answer, but at least they were trying to reach towards what people want to do with their healthcare spending. You know, it has something to do with that. But it seems to me that's why I find the debate it's very closed. It's a very closed partisan debate, and it isn't owning that.
But it's not just a closed debate in Congress, it's also a closed debate in the public airways, because the medical system, you were talking about economic forces, the medical system still owns the airwaves, in the sense that there's not, you know, we were in this room speaking in a warm way about people evolving for a wide variety of choices, but isn't it an interesting market phenomenon at the high end of the market, not to the poor people who can't afford medicine, but there's a significant, in a town like New York here, there's a significant number of people who would probably love to make better informed choices and to get advice that would, you know, cross over different schools and actively Western other forms of medicine, but that's totally impossible for legal and cultural reasons because it would be quashed like that by the doctors.
Well, people are making those choices, is what I'm saying.
They're making it anyway, but there's no institutional.
I'm just asking on that score, it was going to bring up before. Is it possible theoretically to, let's say under a co-op situation, to put in a new type of insurance company that insures in a comprehensive way integrative medicine, so that all of these other things you can't get now with nutrition and so forth, you won't see them on Medicare. Can you get it on that and do it in a way that is fiscally sound?
Well,
That's an interesting test, just even a small scale, because now there's probably going to be an opportunity to do that if there wasn't before.
I think that question is interesting, But I don't think you want to debate that theoretically. I think
No, no,
how are you
I
going
see
to
it done.
inject? I think the question is how are you going to interject that question into the dialogue, because that's the issue.
Right.
Yes,
This is a
also,
process
why would-
issue.
Yeah,
Of,
it's
it's
a-
not determining what. I mean, what we've been talking about is a
Yeah.
holistic approach. So how about a holistic approach to the American people participating, all kinds of people with all kinds of options being included in the process of deciding how we're going to change our healthcare system. That's not an answer. That's an unknowable. We don't know, but it should be something that happens.
But the way that you're
Right.
describing it sounds like an individual package or product, where I'm describing the opportunity for people to create various kinds of, depending on
Yeah.
their preferences,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
who's willing to finance what, and
Yeah.
you know, so that's in other words, a real marketplace. So if you're going to go to a thing where co-op type things are feasible and in fact are being leaned on for things, if you don't have a public option, it's an ideal time to do it. I mean, when we have the tools, there's technology, all kinds of reasons. Maybe there's some other countries that have done something that have pieces of this.
Well, what you're saying is an example of why the American people need to be involved in the debate. Because we have all kinds of ideas,
Yes.
all kinds of
Lots
creative
of
ideas, but we don't get a chance to impact on what comes out of Washington. And there's a lot that could be done.
Can I
So,
say one thing? Just, I just want to throw out for people to ponder as we leave here, but that there is something to be said also, I think, for the effectiveness of some of these approaches being connected to that they're kind of underground. So, like for Continuum, there's the level of creativity you can have and openness and discovery. I have a little bit of concern about making the suggestion that government be totally involved in some of these more creative approaches. And I just want to put that out because if they're going to regulate them in the way that you can still be making discoveries and, you know, and not be making money.
Well, the distinction is there between funding, which is one aspect of what I'm hearing the discussion, should government fund it, or is that even an issue, and regulation. So
Yeah.
it seems like you're conflating those two, aren't you?
They often go together.
Sorry?
They often go together.
No, I'm not saying, yeah, but they don't need, that's not, I'm just saying there's two issues here. You could massively fund something, but not officially regulate, certified, and all the governments.
Well, I think that is you know, in some ways a democracy issue of, I mean, more to the extent that people have a choice of how they want to talk about mental health professionals, you know, as opposed to coming from top down. What's a mental health professional, which is the big fight in this state, you know, somebody who's, you know, heavily licensed or, you know, has all the certificates. So it still seems to me it comes down to some way a issue of dialogue, public dialogue and discourse and input into